All right. For the rest of today, we're going to talk about especially how Athens develops, getting into its democracy and trying to define some things about the Athenian democracy, how it gets going, how it operated. And toward the end of today, we'll talk about a big international problem they get involved with basically all the other Greek cities. They get invaded a couple of times. The Persian Empire will try to conquer Greece. So it's the beginning of the conflict between Persians and the many, many different Greek cities. All right. So, okay, we've seen this map before. So this is just a fairly simplified map of the many different cities. You can see the islands in more detail out here in the seas. But the two major cities we'll be talking about for the rest of the time we talk about Greece are really Sparta down here in the Peloponnesus and Athens up here in a separate kind of island system called Attica. And Athens will be really the one out of 1,000 cities that will develop a democracy, or a mass democracy, as we think of it. All right. Athens wasn't always a democracy, though. It was run by a kind of monarchy, or a system of monarchies. So it was a kind of an oligarchy, basically. The oligarchy was called the archons. So Athens had a kind of, it was called the Council of Archons. It's basically like a city council. There were several archons, and each of them basically represented one of the richer families or other in Athens. And there were several very wealthy, powerful families. And they were the ones who had the resources to promote one of their own family members or one of their most trusted employees to be one of the city leaders. So there's a close connection between the big wealthy landowners, especially basically the super rich of the city, and the city leadership. So the archons basically followed orders from the elite, the rich. And that led to two different systems that pretty simply perpetuated the wealthy's power, increased their wealth and power over the city. First one was a slavery system built mostly in personal debt. So the city council, the archons, passed a series of laws permitting people that have money to make loans to others at pretty extraordinarily high interest rates. And if you couldn't pay off the loan, then you would be enslaved to the person who gave you the loan. Does that make sense? And these interest rates could get up to 30 or 40%. So they're massive, massive interest rates that for a lot of kind of common working people are virtually impossible to pay off. And so that generates a lot of anger within the Athenian society that these wealthy landowners are basically doing what we today call predatory lending. They're out there looking for people who need loans just to get money to survive, and there's no way they can ever pay it off. So that these loan companies are basically getting slaves. They're giving loans specifically to get those people in such debt where they can never escape and then become slaves to the company. Does that make sense? And this is an outrage amongst especially the working people. Many of whom are being enslaved. So they don't like it, and they're increasingly angry and vocal about it. And they demand changes from the archons, but it's not a democracy. So the archons may listen to your complaints, but they don't change any of the laws because they serve at the behest of the rich. Does that make sense? The people that are profiting off of the system. And at the same time, they also passed another set of laws that lower taxes on the rich. So that the rich pay lower levels of tax to the city than the average working people do. Does that make sense? Does this sound familiar? Yeah. So even today in the United States, people who don't really do a lot of physical work, who simply move money around from one account to another, tend to pay lower income tax rates than average kind of working people who work in houses or work in roads or do the real labor of society. And that's pretty easy to prove today, and maybe that'll change in the future. But why would the Archons do this? Say again?
The wealthy profit off of it.
Yeah, because the wealthy get to keep more of their own money, and they're the ones who choose who becomes an Archon. So they control the government. So again, the Archons may listen to complaints from the average working people, but they don't change anything about it. So over time, the amount of kind of anger and frustration just builds and builds and builds amongst the kind of working people of Athens. And every once in a while, they make a threat against the Archons. If you don't make some changes, we're going to rise up in a revolution, and we're going to overthrow you, which may involve killing you. And then we'll make the changes ourselves. And this goes on for years, this kind of systematic threat, and maybe the Archons may make some little kind of changes, marginal changes to the laws, but nothing really changes socially. The same system seems to keep going on and on, no matter how much the Archons say that they made great progress. Sound familiar? If you have a big problem in society, your elected leaders may say they're going to make big changes, but usually today the changes you see aren't really big systematic upheavals. They're usually just little marginal things that don't really change society virtually at all. And we could cite many, many examples of that, say in the United States government over the past 30 or 40 years. And crisis point hits right around the year 600 BCE, where there's a giant threat of revolution basically against the Archons, and the Archons have to give in. It's a real dangerous moment. And so one politician named Solon gets himself appointed sole Archon. So he's the only one. So he has a lot of power to kind of reset policy and change laws. And he's really put in power by the threat of the masses, the threat of revolution. So he goes into office basically as the mayor of the city. And he starts making big changes, big legal changes, especially attacking this debt slavery system. First big change he made was that he said there's all of these debts out there that are not being repaid because they're basically predatory. And he passes a law that cancels all those loans. It says the people that are in debt, they don't have to pay it off, and they're not going to be enslaved. So he says, stopping that system almost completely and hitting the reset button. So a lot of the masses of the Athenian population, the people of Athens, really like this law. And especially the people that are in debt really like this law. Who doesn't like this? Yeah, the rich. Because not only are they losing access to slaves, they've also lost the money that they've loaned out. They're not getting it back, one way or the other. So the wealthy are very, very angry at this guy. They basically declare him to be an enemy of the elite. And he is. Next law he passes is to break up the huge landowning, as we would think of them today, like plantations. Some of these families own thousands and thousands of acres of land. And in the ancient world, land is the engine of wealth. That's how people get rich. You own a bunch of land. You can't, even if you own like 5 or 6 acres, it's hard to farm all that by yourself. So you hire wage workers to come in and work the land for you. And if you have hundreds of acres, you need a lot of workers. And that's why all these rich people are so want to get slaves so badly. They want to get unpaid workers. So Solon passed a law saying if you have, I can't remember how many hundreds of acres of land it was, but it's quite a lot, more than one family needs to farm enough food to survive for themselves and make some money on the side. But he said in these gigantic plantations of thousands of acres, he said we're going to allow that family to keep a good chunk of it for themselves. Any of their so-called excess land, their extra land, will now become government property, and the government will break it up into small little plots, say a couple acres each, and give them out to the poor farmers of Athens. So the poor and the kind of working class people love this guy. And the rich hate him, and hate him deeply. Third law he passes, he tries to build a system to empower the masses politically, because he realized that once he dies, or he leaves office, that the rich are going to try to get back and appoint new archons that will be favorable to them. So Solon is already thinking about beyond his lifetime. How can he perpetuate this system where the masses will basically rule the city one way or the other? And that third one is, it's successful for the short term in the first years after he, I think he retires. I don't think he dies in office, but I have to look that up. I can't remember. But after he's out of office, one way or the other, the system works well for a few years. But like a lot of political systems, when you're talking about decades and then generations, over about the next century, it is slowly watered down piece by piece by piece. Does it make sense? Either through the rich bribing politicians to get the old system back in place, to basically remove all of Solon's laws, or through just convincing politicians intellectually that if you lower taxes on the rich, then that will help everybody. Does that sound familiar? No?
Yeah.
If we lower taxes on the rich, then that prosperity will trickle down to everyone else and we'll all benefit. Yeah, so those are similar arguments that you still see in the United States today and some other parts of the world. Almost never works, and I can't think of an instance historically where it has worked to the effect that it was promised. But some politicians are willing to believe it, so still today. So either through bribery or just through a political philosophy that some people believe, Solon's system is watered down over the next 100 years. By the time you get down to about the year 500, so about 100 years later, basically the rich are back in power, and they're choosing who the leadership is. Does that make sense? All right. And then there is an armed uprising against the last of the archons. And they're going to have basically a kind of vote amongst the Athenian people around the year 500 about who they're going to choose to be the next leadership. One candidate in this election is named Asagoras, and he is obviously the candidate of the rich. He has a lot of money behind him. They're investing in his campaign. Sound familiar? To get him elected, because he knows that he's going to lower taxes on them and do everything favorable for them. There's another guy who runs for office named Cleisthenes, and he is an enemy of the elite, basically. He promises to raise taxes on them, basically really put Solon's policies back in place. So this big election is held, and Cleisthenes wins because he gets the support of the masses, the average working people. Because there's only so many rich people, and they're not a majority. Yeah?
How did Solon come to power?
There's a revolution. And so he was appointed to be the leader of the city in order to avoid a full-scale revolt of the poor, the poor and the workers.
When they tore down the rest of the archons and then said there's only going to be one.
Yep. And gave him a lot of power to make changes. So he's a smart politician. He knows how to use that popular outrage. And he doesn't just go to the outraged people. He goes to the rich and says, look, I can make deals that will keep them happy to avoid a revolution. So the revolution hits, they're coming into your houses, they're going to kill you and your family. They ain't messing around. So he says, put me in power and I'll make a new system where you can keep a lot of your wealth, but it's not going to be you can get away with anything like you used to. So he's and this is one reason that there is so much optimism for, say, when Obama went into office in 2009. A lot of historians were pointing at Solon, but we should do what Solon did and say, I'm the only one, go to the rich and say, I'm the only one standing between you and the people outside your houses with pitchforks and torches and are ready to burn it all down. Does that make sense? But a lot of us are pretty critical of Obama for not taking that stance, quite bluntly. We'll see what the historians say eventually about Obama, but again, I'm pretty critical. Had that moment,
Yeah.
if you remember 2008, 2009, when the economy was crashing, people losing their jobs, being kicked out of their homes, there was anger in society, and you could feel it. There was hatred of the rich. And I still feel it personally, but it's just me. I look around in society, and I don't see other people feeling it that much anymore. No?
Forget Obama. We're going to have to worry about the next 4 years.
We'll see. That's what happens when... I hope you guys went out and voted. That's what happens when you get compromised candidates.
Bunch of things.
But I also argue that's what happens when you have an electoral system that is run by money. Any game that runs on money will always be won by the rich. That's my personal philosophy. Does that make sense? Yeah. So I don't think it's always Obama's fault. I think it's a systematic problem. And I don't think it'll change until we get the money out of the system. But again, that's just me. You don't have to agree with that. You won't be tested on that. Nope. Okay, so Cleisthenes wins the election. Getting back to what we're supposed to be talking about.
Okay,
Yeah, question.
Cleisthenes,
Cleisthenes. Yeah.
he won the election against who?
A guy named Asagoras. And Asagoras was basically the rich-backed candidate. He was the money candidate. Yeah. But since Asagoras lost, he's kept out of power. We'll talk more about Cleisthenes. Asagoras will try to come back, but Cleisthenes, he's really important because he doesn't just win this election and bring back some of Solon's laws. He built a whole new electoral system, a whole new political system. And this is the kind of creation of mass democracy as we think of it. All right, so Cleisthenes wins this election in 508. His first thing is to create a new governing body, a new bureaucracy. This is like the executive branch of government. This is going to be the side that collects the taxes and enforces the law. So they are called the Council of 500. It's 500 citizens of the city that are chosen by lottery, by lot, by what's called the deans. So he set up this other thing called the deans. The deans are 10 different debating clubs within the city, and they're voluntary. So it's almost like 10 different policies within Athens, and they really just debate politics. And they're totally voluntary. You're not forced to join. And it's a polis kind of system, so it's only men, male citizens of the city. So there's 10 deans, and some of these deans have hundreds of members. And in this system, each dean gets to pick 50 of its own guys to send to the overall council, right? So each dean picks 50, there's 10 deans, that's how you get 500. And each dean, they don't have elections in the dean, they put every member's name into a box basically, and they draw out 50 names. Does that make sense? And your membership in the council kind of rotates. So you would go in, I think you're in the council for a year, and every year they have a new drawing within each dean. So it's extremely likely that every single male citizen who volunteers to be in one of the deans at some point will be a member of the council, just through drawing the names. Does that make sense? All right. So they enforce the laws, they execute the laws. That's why it's called the executive kind of power. They collect the taxes, they build the armies, they do all that normal kind of stuff. And they set the agenda for debates in what's called the assembly, which is where the men of the city gather to pass laws, to debate laws, and to take a vote whether or not this should become a law or if it's going to be defeated. Does that make sense? So that's called the assembly. And the assembly is open to any male citizen. All you have to do is show up. You don't have to be elected. You don't have to be chosen. An adult male citizen shows up to the assembly and can debate, can get up on the stage and give a speech, and gets to vote. So the assembly is extremely powerful. The assembly is the only place that's allowed to declare war or treaties. I mean, they're the legislators, basically. They're the lawmakers. And any proposal that the executive power, the council, makes, the assembly has to accept. So this would be like, the city council of Fontana. They want to pass a law, so they go to the meeting of the public and ask the public, will you accept this law? And it's a yes or no vote. Does that make sense? So this is why we call this thing in Athens direct democracy. You don't have to be elected into office to be a lawmaker. All you have to do is be a citizen. Is that clear? And they make public buildings for the council and for the assembly. So they kind of remake their city to accomplish all this stuff. And I have a short video to show you that describes these buildings and how this whole system operated. And they built a court system based on these ideas. So democracy becomes a big thing for Athens, a big, famous, even worship thing eventually. So you see that participating in the democracy is extremely important. At least they define it as extremely important for Athenian citizens because they're literally passing their own laws. But not everyone gets to participate in the democracy. So the democracy is only for men because it's a very sexist Greek society, at least in the ancient world. Slaves don't get to participate in the democracy, so if you've been enslaved, you have lost your voting rights, your political rights. And eventually they'll start talking about slaves of having lost part of their humanity. So the pressure on slavery becomes, it grows over time. And any non-citizen cannot participate in the democracy. So if you're a foreigner, or if you cannot prove that your family have been citizens for, I think it's 2 or 3 generations, then you're not allowed into the democracy. And historians today estimate that through all these other restrictions, that only about 10% of the population of Athens are full-fledged citizens that are participating in the government. So they exclude 90%, 9 out of 10 people through all these methods. So it's a very restricted democracy, obviously, a democracy of the 10%. But it's much more of a democracy than really any other place in the world had for a long, long, long time. Nearly the whole world is run by kings or emperors or some kind of warlord or dictator or another. So this is one of the more kind of radical pieces of progress, if you don't believe in that kind of progress at all. So, questions about the democracy? Nope. All right. There's another problem with this kind of democracy, and that is majority vote decides everything, which could be a big problem. What if a lot of people that show up to vote that day just don't really like somebody and they pass a law to kick them out of the city and ban them for life? Or to execute somebody? If you get a majority vote, that's what happens. So the democracy empowered the majority, or at least the majority that showed up that day to vote, and they could take a lot of actions against individuals or groups that are unpopular for one reason or another, or the people fear for one reason or the other. And the Athenians became kind of obsessively protective of their democracy, at least internally. They start trying to devise systems, as you saw in the video, to try to stop anybody's ability to overthrow the democracy and reestablish some kind of dictatorship. And one system they came up with was called ostracism. And this is when every few months or so, you could show up to the Penaics and you would be given a little kind of spare piece of clay, and you can write the name of any person you want in the city. And this is a kind of open ballot. And you would write down the name of anyone you think is building up power to try to overthrow the democracy and set up a dictatorship. And if one name shows up on enough of these blank ballots, that person is automatically kicked out of the city, no questions asked. Does that make sense? And this is called ostracism because these little pieces of clay are called ostraka. And that's where we get our modern term to be ostracized. What does ostracized really mean today?
Kicked out.
Yeah. Not always just kicked out, but maybe just avoided. Yeah, a lot of the population, if you're ostracized, you're just ignored. You're kind of shunted. You're shunned. And that's where the term comes from. But back in ancient Athens, they literally used to kick people completely out of the city, like physically. They forced them to leave. So one of the problems with the Athenian democracy is there's no such thing as what you think of as like human rights today. You don't have freedom of property or freedom to even be in the city for as long as you want just as a citizen, because the government could come after you. Does that make sense?
Why would the government come after you?
Maybe you're just really unpopular. Maybe a lot of people don't like you and they vote to have you executed. So there's no such thing as the kind of Bill of Rights types of freedoms that we think of today in the United States. And that's really one of the genius things about the U.S. Constitution. If you read the Constitution, most of it talks about the electoral system, right? How we have elections, how many representatives there are, all that stuff. But then just after they finished the document, they added on these amendments that give us the supposed natural rights that the government can supposedly never take away. Most of those rights are not effective anymore. But that could be something that you can think about for your own future. If you read the Bill of Rights, a lot of them really aren't protections anymore. You ever read the Bill of Rights? Yeah, there's stuff about the government cannot go into your house and raid your stuff without a warrant.
Right.
That doesn't exist anymore. They can listen to your phone calls and do all kinds of things.
Your privacy.
Yep. There's things about you have the right to not be tortured, but that's obviously not true anymore. But it's still on the paper. It's still in the document, so it just has to be enforced better. So what the ancient Athens didn't have any of those protections at all. It's just majority vote. All right. So democracy really gets going in its most famous form around the year 500 and goes into the next few decades, next many decades. One of the more famous politicians who kind of rises, not as really an elected leader, but as a guy who shows up to the Penaics and gives speeches, and his speeches tend to convince a lot of the voters to vote in his favor for whatever he wants. So he becomes a kind of very famous debater and leader of the Athenian democracy. Unelected, he's just another citizen, but he's very good at convincing people to vote with him, vote for his ideas. His name is Themistocles, and he does a whole lot of important things in his life as one of the Athenians. One of his biggest proposals, he goes into the Penaics and he says, the Persian Empire is getting ready to attack us, and we need to figure out how to defend ourselves. And his speech basically says, we have a lot of money in our city, so let's take a bunch of that money and build a big, powerful navy of trireme boats, some of which already exist, so it's been tested. And the idea is basically that a trireme boat has so many guys with oars kind of pushing in the water, pulling, to push the boat, move it around real fast. The triremes move faster than any Persian boats, any of the Persian Navy, and they're more maneuverable. So they're agile. They can kind of change directions much faster and easier than Persian warships. And in the ancient world, before you have cannons and whatnot, you really attack an enemy boat by slamming into it, ripping a hole in their boat and making it sink. So the faster your boat moves, the better of a weapon you are. Does that make sense? If you can move faster, you can hit harder. Therefore, you have kind of better firepower in today's terms. Does that make sense? And that's a big controversial thing because the Athenian democracy doesn't have enough guys to kind of man all these boats with the oars and move them around. So one problem is that they're going to have to populate these warships with slaves. And a lot of the Athenians don't like that idea because when you put people in a boat and they all have to row, almost like a hoplite army, they have to be trained to move in unison with each other. Some people in Athens argue we don't really want to train our slaves in how to work together because that might inspire them to rise up against us. Does that make sense? Okay. So that's the argument against it. But eventually the vote is held, and they vote to endorse this trireme navy. And here's a picture, or a couple pictures of trireme boats. And it's called a trireme because it's basically 3 levels, 3 stories of oarsmen lined up along the boat. So you have very long oars, and that's their power system. It's guys inside just pulling the oar all at the same time. And it's a very effective leap forward in naval technology, military technology. So that's one of the first things that Themistocles does. And when the war happens, because it's his idea to build this navy, he'll be appointed admiral of the navy. So he'll be basically the general of these boats in the waters. Does that make sense? So, questions about triremes at all?
So there are different levels?
Yeah.
So the oars were different sizes?
Yep. Yeah, 3 stories of oarsmen up and down the boat, really. And that's really all the boat is the oarsmen. There's a cover. Sometimes they'll put some sails on it to try to harness wind power. But they always have these rams on the ends. That's to ram the enemy boat and sink them.
That's
That's their weapon.
element of defense.
Yeah. And Athens doesn't really have much of an army, so they invest everything they got in this navy.
So they don't come to land.
Nope. They'll hire other cities to be their armies to defend their land. Other questions?
Any idea why the Troyans look like a fish? They build it like a fish. I've seen others and other books.
Yeah.
They look like a fish.
Probably because fish are in the water and they're big and powerful in the water, and maybe it's a scary thing. I don't know. Other questions? Alrighty. Okay, and this is about the point where, getting into the past the mid 500s when Cyrus is around. Getting down to around the year 400 or so, the Persian Empire has conquered Mesopotamia, has conquered the Eastern Mediterranean and Egypt, and also conquered Anatolia, this giant peninsula. And there are Greek cities along that coastline, along the western coastline of Anatolia. So when the Persians conquer Anatolia, they also conquer a bunch of Greek cities. And that angers a lot of the other Greek cities. And the Greek cities that are conquered, they start writing letters back to Athens and Sparta and Corinth and the other big, powerful cities in Greece. Help us, basically. Help us in a revolution to overthrow the Persians. And so each of the remaining Greek cities that haven't been attacked yet, they have a decision to make. Are they going to send armies and try to take on the Persian Empire? And most of those Greek cities don't want to do that because the Persian Empire is the superpower of the region. And look at all this land that Persia controls compared to this little bit of Greece. So they're afraid of the Persians, and the Persians, they don't lose wars. They've never lost a war yet. at least a war of conquest. So when the message goes out, Athens agrees to help one of those cities. And Athens really does this hoping that Sparta is going to join this war against the Persians, because Sparta has this big army. The Spartans don't want to join it because the Spartans figure, well, if the Persians go to war and they attack and destroy Athens, then Athens won't be a problem for Sparta anymore. Athens and Sparta are kind of rivals for power in Greece. Does that make sense? So Sparta sits this one out, hoping that Persia will destroy their Greek enemy. So Athens, they're kind of left on their own to fight the Persians. And the Persians devise a battle plan. The Persians basically figure they have this giant army. They'll just put a bunch of them on boats along the coastline of western Anatolia, and then just sail across the sea and land at some point near Athens and just unload their soldiers, attack the city, and win. So the Persians thought this wasn't really a big deal. They'd done this kind of stuff before in other places. The Athenian government learns of this plan through spies and bribery and whatnot. So Athens, they know they're on the verge of war. So Athens mobilizes their army. They're getting ready to fight. And Athens sends spies. They send guys from Athens to basically sit up and down the coastline and figure out where the Persian boats are going to land. So they're just sitting there looking for boats out on the sea for a while. And at a place called Marathon, that's where the Persian boats show up. So the couple guys that are at Marathon, they're watching the boats come in. They say, we have to get back to Athens itself really fast. And they run from Marathon back to Athens, which is a little less than 30 miles. They get back to the city as fast as they can, within about half a day or so. And they, give the message that the Persians have landed at Marathon. And the Athenian army goes out and they attack the Persians. And nobody really thinks that Athens is going to win this thing, because the Persian army has never lost and they have a huge army. But not only does Athens win the Battle of Marathon, it's an absolute slaughter. The Persians suffer something like 6,000 soldiers killed at this battle, and Athens only loses like 100. So it's a completely lopsided, overwhelming victory for Athens. And the Spartans that survive, they get back on their boats and they go back. They go back home to Anatolia. Does that make sense? And the Athenians will celebrate the Battle of Marathon every year after that, kind of commemorate it, by having a race from Marathon back to Athens the next year and the next year on the same days of the year, basically. So it becomes a public celebration. And that's where they run a race, and it becomes known as marathon running. And that's what marathons are today. They're supposedly the exact distance that those guys ran back then, which is, does anyone run marathons? It's less than 30 miles, isn't it? It's like 28 point something miles.
28.7.
Yeah. So, a lot longer than I want to run, which is 28.7 feet. But there's one guy, he's running 300 marathons or something like that within a year and a half. He was doing a marathon like every 3 days or something. You heard of this? A guy from Britain?
Wow.
Just he's raising money for some charity.
Oh,
It's-
awesome.
And they interviewed him on the radio. And how do you do that? How do you run a marathon on like Thursday and then run another one on Sunday? And he said something like, well, it's really tough at first, but your body kind of gets used to it. So the first few weeks were pretty tough. Okay. But he was just due to finish the very last one like last week or the week before or something. So he accomplished it. He actually did it.
Wow.
It's amazing.
Got to
Yep. But so Athens, they celebrate this battle, and they don't just celebrate it as like we just happened to win and it was luck. Why do they say they won? Because of what? Oh, they're smarter, but why are they smarter? Because they're a democracy. So they say we have a fairly equal society. All the citizens get a vote. And they say that this is such a better political system than all these other monarchies and kings and tyrants, basically. And they say maybe the gods intervened on our side and helped us win this overwhelming victory as an example to everybody else in the world that they should become democracies too. Does that make sense? So, and Sparta is humiliated for not joining in on this. So Sparta is kind of angry, bitter with Athens for a while, and they'll look to become famous again. And they'll get their opportunity pretty quick. So the first invasion hit in Darius I, in his last years as Persian emperor. And when he died, his son Xerxes became the next emperor. And Xerxes appears to have, right when he gets to the throne, he says, we're not just going to attack Athens, we're going to conquer all of Greece in order to fulfill his father's great dream, that romantic idea. So Xerxes, really right when he gets to the throne, he starts planning a gigantic invasion. Reportedly the biggest invasion in human history to that point. And starts building up this mammoth, unbelievably large army. And they're not just going to do a quick strike against one area of Athens or Greece overall. They have so many hundreds of thousands of soldiers that they're just going to kind of lumber along very slowly around the kind of northeastern coastline of Greece on this map called Thrace up there. And they're just going to slowly just move all the way down the coastline until they get kind of close into Thessaly, and then they'll start attacking all the Greek cities and say one by one we'll beat them all and just conquer the whole place. Make it just one more part of the Persian Empire. And this army is so massive that it needs its own moving supply line. So the Persians also built a gigantic navy to follow along the coastline to keep bringing food and communications and messages and all that stuff. And reportedly, the Persian emperor moves with the army. And this takes several years to get going. But when it hits, the Greeks look at this as an apocalyptic war. They believe that if the Persians conquer Greece, then they'll wipe out all the Greek people, take over all the land, end Greek culture. And of course, all these Greeks think that their culture, their achievements are the greatest in the world. So they're thinking that, from the Greek perspective, is if the Persians win, this is the beginning of the new Dark Ages, where all advancements and progress in Greek society are all going to be wiped out. Does that make sense? So for them, this is the apocalypse. The Greeks take the idea that we're either going to win this and kick the Persians out, or it's all over. It's going to be mass genocide. Which is a questionable assumption, because the Persians have conquered other places and not wiped out those populations and destroyed every facet of their culture. The Persian system seems to be mostly you agree to become part of the Persian Empire, and you get to kind of keep your own local leaders and lands and all that. But that's not what the Greeks were thinking. So virtually every single Greek city signs an alliance to defend all of Greece. This is like the one time that virtually all the Greek cities agree on anything. They stop fighting each other in this rare moment to defend themselves against a foreign invasion. Does that make sense? So this becomes known as the Persian War to the Greeks, because they're fighting the Persians. So the Persian army does kind of slowly start moving down, and all the Greek cities build like a unity army, and the Spartans are the leader of that army because the Spartans have the best soldiers, the best trained, the most vicious soldiers. Athens has the biggest navy, the Trireme Navy. So Athens gets all the other cities that have navies together, and Athens will run their naval alliance. Does Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
All right. The Spartans come up with a strategy to pick out a place to defend Greece, to take on the Persian army, and they pick this place here called Thermopylae. And they picked that place because Thermopylae is right there on the ocean, right there on the coast.
Where is that?
It's right here, just south of this thing called Thessaly. This is Thermopylae right here. So it's right there on this coastline. They choose that because the Persian boats can't get into that narrow crossing. That's kind of shallow water. So the Persian warships can't get in. And so it's, on the land, you have one side is basically the beach of shallow water. Right next to it on the other side are these massive cliffs, like mountains. And since the Persian army, this isn't their neighborhood, they don't know really where they're going, they're going to be forced to go between the water and the cliffs and try to force all their soldiers to this narrow pass. Does that make sense? But they can't do it because they have hundreds and hundreds of thousands of soldiers. So they can only send, I think it's something like, 2,000 or 3,000 soldiers through this narrow pass at a time. And the Greek army, led by the Spartans, just sit on the other side of the pass and they take on the Persian army a few thousand soldiers at a time. It's a kind of funneling problem for the Persian army. This would be like, if the fire alarm goes off in here right now, can all, 35 of us or 40 of us or so, can we all get up and go through that door right at the exact same moment? No, if that fire alarm goes off, what's going to happen? People closest to the door, they're getting out first. The rest of us are going to gather at the door, and a few of us will go out one at a time, or two at a time, or whatever happens. Does that make sense? So it's a funneling problem. That's basically what the Persian army is doing here at Thermopylae. They gather at the doorway, but only a few of them can get through at a time. And the Greeks are right on the other side of the door ready to fight. So they don't fight all 35 of us, they fight 2 of us at a time. Does that make sense? And it's extremely successful for a while. Here's a closer map of it. And the Spartan king himself shows up with 300 of his own soldiers. They are only part of, I think it's about 1,000 or so. There's Greek soldiers that show up. And they come from all kinds of different cities. So it's not just the Spartans. And over the first couple days of the battle, the Greeks are actually winning. Because they know where they are, they know the geography. And if they only have to fight a couple thousand Persian soldiers at a time, then it's a pretty even fight. And the Spartans are expert soldiers. The problem arises when one Greek guy goes to the Persian general on the other side of the cliffs and says, I know a secret passage around the cliff where you can get several more thousand troops around that pass and come out behind the Greek army. Does that make sense? So he tells the Persian leaders a secret, and they probably paid him for it. And when Leonidas reportedly sees that the Persians are coming down that secret pass, and he realizes that his Greek army is going to be trapped, he gives an order telling all the other Greeks to leave, to retreat, to escape, and fight it out some other place, and that he and his 300 Spartans will continue fighting at Thermopylae and give the rest of them an opportunity to escape. So the Spartans will be a decoy to keep the fighting going. And they know they're going to be killed in this because they're going to be overwhelmed at some point. So Leonidas and the 300 Spartan soldiers, and it's not just them, like another 100 Corinthians or something stays around. But they all die on that battlefield. None of them survive.
That's why they call it the 300.
Yep, and that's why we have the famous stories and now movies and whatnot made out of them. So that's the most famous land battle of the Persian War, and does such damage and really harms the kind of confidence of the Persian army, to to the point the Persians will eventually win at Thermopylae, and then they'll go on and try to attack Thebes, and they'll start running all over the place, attacking different cities, trying to win the war. They run into a giant problem at a place called Salamis, which is an island right here, yep, just west of Athens. So the Persian navy is kind of following along until Thermopylae. They can't get there, so they just continue along the coastline. And Themistocles is the leader of the Greek navy. And they are basically sitting at a port at Salamis, at the city itself. And Themistocles is a pretty smart guy. He keeps the Greek boats kind of close to the port and tricks the Persians into thinking that the Greeks are trapped and that the Persian commanders think they have this advantage. So the Persians send their boats into the pass, the water, to get closer to the Greek boats and sink them right when the high tide comes in. And the higher water level kind of pushes the Persian boats around, so they're disorganized. And Themistocles knew that. The Greeks knew that because it's their neighborhood. And when the Persian boats are basically going in circles trying to get control of themselves, the Greeks just attack and sink a bunch of them. So that's the naval battle of Salamis. It destroys a giant portion of the Persian fleet. Does that make sense? And a lot of the remaining Persian fleet goes home. So they get out of there. And that leaves the Persian land army wandering around, mostly in Attica, without supplies, without good communications anymore. And it takes another couple years, but there's one last big battle at a place called Plataea. And that's the final kind of unified Greek victory on land against the Persians. They don't destroy the entire Persian army, but the Persian army basically surrenders, and in the peace treaty that follows the battle, they basically agree to go back home. So Persia does not conquer Greece. The Greeks eventually win. But this is a long war that goes on for 14 years or something. It's a pretty long time. That we just skipped past and did the three big battles real quick, and that's it for us. Does that make sense? So the Greeks survive, and they'll go back to their 1,000 different cities. They'll always be afraid of a future Persian invasion, especially Athens, and we'll talk next time about what Athens and Sparta and the other Greek cities do now that the Persians have been evicted, kicked out of the area.